I just am so excited we're in this session because you know how when you travel around the world and you see very similar architecture, like there's no way they were like interacting with one another, and it's just amazing. Well, that's what's happening today because I had no idea you and Katie and others were doing this work. We're also talking about change and sustainability and evaluation, so it's just a perfect fit. So I'm really excited to introduce my other co-presenters, Dr. Robert Strong and Dr. Jen Strong. We have some other folks on here at the bottom that weren't able to come with us, Dr. Elbert, Dr. Baker, and Dr. Murphrey. So what happened is we had an idea. Isn't that how it always starts? So we had this idea. We've been working a lot in international development and other types of evaluation projects as external evaluators. And we kept noticing that it didn't matter what we did in our evaluation. We would come in and we'd interview and we would look at documents, we'd write a report, and then what happens? And so we really were thinking about this notion of this more holistic approach and how we could make things where the partnerships between the biological sciences and the social and behavioral scientists were able to act more in a translational way, where evaluation serves as an ongoing process to really institute change that is sustainable. And so that's the concept behind this, and we'll be telling you a little bit more as we go on. Next slide, Mary. So I just said this, yay! So part of it was we were writing a grant proposal, and we were trying to make the case of why many times we don't speak the same language with our counterparts that sometimes we call bench scientists. And so how did we interact and make their ability to translate the information to communities? And so we also are interested in these mixed method, more complicated, systematic approaches that field test these pathways, processes, and variables that form causal mechanisms to measure innovation and change. Because many times that's what we're looking for, is a change in behavior, a change in the adoption and the approach that they're using. Thank you, Mary. Robert.
Thanks, Dr. Dooley. So the purpose and objectives of what we're trying to do, you can see here on the screen. I don't need to read those to you specifically, but we developed an eval framework, and we're going to break down each letter of that acronym here this morning for you in just a moment. You'll see us kind of motivated, maybe cheer, ask for your chance back to us. I think we're going to be kind of engaging, hopefully, with you this morning. Really, the purpose of our approach, we call it a framework at the beginning, but really a more appropriate word now, it's an approach, is to increase skills to promote a more holistic evaluation within organizations. Secondly, we're going to increase engagement of both users and beneficiaries. And if you're wondering why, primarily Dr. Dooley talked about impact just a moment ago. We're trying to do better, not just analyze impact, but be able to help project teams report impact back to their donors and stakeholders of what they're doing to better inform decision makers that the value of a particular project or program is having. And lastly, we want to increase collaboration. And we talk a lot about hard science and soft science and bench science and social science. And our language that we're trying to communicate is the biological scientists, and us up here, we're social and behavioral scientists. And so that's what we're also trying to do with our eval approach, is to increase the collaboration amongst all scientists.
Next slide, please. All right, so just to give us an idea when we think about research, because one of the questions our reviewers said is like, where's the data? Well, this started out conceptual, and because we're now working in practice, we're kind of in this research and development stage. So we've been going through framing this, looking at the literature, working with a group of colleagues. And then what we started doing is networking and putting it into our project plans, telling other people about it. And now we're in these stages where we're trying to see how this will work, fully refine it, and eventually help this be more of a standard practice that people can use. It's flexible though. And so that's what we want to talk to you a little bit more about, how you can interject a different theory depending on what you're measuring and how you can build these approaches in to meet your specific needs for evaluation. Mary, thanks.
So I mentioned just a while ago, we're going to be active and engaging in here, right? Active learning. So give me an E.
E.
All right, very good. So the first letter in our acronym obviously is evaluation. We all in here know what evaluation is. We're not teaching you anything new about evaluation. It is at the beginning thinking about an evaluation. We're typically nothing against biological scientists at all. That's a disclaimer. But sometimes they think of evaluation at the very end when they've already developed everything. So what we are promoting with our approach is that evaluation should be thought of also at the very beginning. It should be as integral to the entire process as the actual introduction or need for the respective project or program.
All right, give me a V.
V.
Thank you. All right, so our V stands for values. So what that means is not only does the evaluator need to understand their personal values, because we understand that that evaluator is an instrument. They need to understand what they value. They need to understand what the project values. So looking at that sustainable project, and then the community. And we know, and we've talked about today with each of our presentations, that every community stands for different values. And so that evaluator needs to take that time to understand the values of the community. Is it a cultural piece? Is it an application piece? So as we look at that congruence, and the leadership literature calls that authenticity, how do we make sure that we have an authentic and values-based evaluation?
Thank you. All right, give me an A.
A.
All right, so of course we're educators. So our A is active for active learning and experiential learning. I made it too long, so we just used active. But many of you know that if you're working in a community and you have something like your new bags that are better, like we talk about Rogers, attributes. And so how do we help people to understand that? They have to see it, observe, trialability. It needs to be culturally relevant. It needs to be easy to use and not too difficult. And so we think that the best approach in evaluation is to, at the beginning, develop these field testings, experimental plots, and things for people. This is old school, farm field schools, but a lot of times that piece is being lost. And without people having the opportunity to try it and practice it, to see themselves using it, to be mentored, those kinds of things, they're not as sustainable. Once that person leaves us in the training, people are going, we go back to our old ways, right? And so they need to get that practice with it, active. And
Give me an L.
L.
So for us, L stands for leadership. And for those who in the room that know me, you know that's my bag. So understanding that impactful part of the evaluator and the people that you're working with, leaving them in a better place that you got them, but then giving them the tools to lead and move the project forward after you leave. So when we talk about leadership, we talk about it inspiring others towards a common goal. So being able to articulate that goal, being able to understand how do we engage in critical thinking, how do we mentor the people that we're working with to take what we're doing and continue moving it forward. So it's not just a one and done, one-shot training, it's how can we actually leave an impactful presence for what we did.
So,
we saw this right earlier.
yeah, absolutely. So we won't rehash a lot of Rogers, and obviously proven over time, but to share with you we should talk about field testing and pilot testing, what we've been doing. In the persuasion stage, we have some data with a collaborative project in Malawi of farmers trying to, the ministry trying to help farmers to reduce aflatoxins from maize post-harvest. And so we've developed an instrument, we've tested that instrument that's separate from this particular piece here. There's one of those letters in that acronym within that instrument that's not reliable, so we're revising questions related to that respective acronym for the instrument. There's that piece. Also want to share that our approach, our evaluation approach is currently being used at 6 different institutions in the U.S. and their graduate evaluation class is as well. And so we are also very interested in collaborating with other institutions or groups who would like to use our particular approach in their evaluation class, either graduate or undergraduate. But we lean back on Rogers to really kind of understand, number one, we're trying to teach individuals, both biological and social and behavioral sciences, about our respective approach. And two, we're trying to better discern how those groups, as well as faculty at institutions, not just extension specialists or not just NGO change agents, how those groups decide to adopt or reject our particular approach for their context.
And I'll add one
Please.
more. It's okay, you can leave this up. For examples, you know, it's interesting when you come up with an idea and then you're like, okay, will anybody use this? So our original idea was to train especially graduate students, because every institution needs project evaluators. So using this as a part of a teaching tool. But I will say that I've been working with a group of biologists from health centers, hospitals, and from entomology departments, and they have a lot of difficulty trying to explain the team science. They need to be able to communicate to NSF. So we're using this evaluation framework to also measure how the scientific team is working together, and then how those discoveries that they're going to impact the community. So it seems to be flexible enough we can use it in different ways.
Absolutely. And I failed to mention also that this is the evaluation foundation of a zoonotic center proposal at our campus with the National Institutes of Health. It's in review, but the point is we are trying to use this to underpin both, I would say, small and large evaluation projects as well, at the same time training current graduate students to be evaluation specialists post-graduation. So because our abstract rules, as you all know, 1,000 words, it's hard to get everything in there. So even in the conference proceedings when they're published, you won't see this, but we'll drive you to the QR code in a moment to where the journal article of this particular illustration exists. But this is our eval, their framework. We're calling it an approach now. And I'm sorry, I think we still have projector issues with lighting and stuff. I'm colorblind,
Yes.
so I'm on the same page now as everybody and being able to see things. So if you notice this whole, what we call this holistic review of evaluation, and it's not linear, it's more multidimensional. If you think about on the outside, your communication, critical thinking, we've not talked about that yet based upon time. Ethics, teams, impact, and culture, that's been mentioned in every presentation this morning and here. And then within those, think about communication channels, right? I was asking you about that earlier. The innovation decision process, don't need to mention that a great deal. Innovation attributes, right, of the either technology or the information from the organization to the stakeholders. Talked a little bit in here this morning about opinion leadership, characteristics of the actual adopters. That could be farmers, it could be biological scientists, right? They all are all adopters. And the characteristics of our stakeholders or our target audiences. With, of course, our acronyms there underpinning that. Yes.
And what we've also been exploring is this particular model. We were looking at change and adoption, but really the core, the eval stays. You have a different project, you're looking at a different theory, you would plug that in and the constructs that are important for that study. This can change on the outside depending on what evaluants you're looking at. So it's not only for Rogers.
That's exactly right. And a great example is trust. Trust is not here. Some folks here at this conference has been talking about the characteristic or the variable of trust. How do you measure trust? How do you know that stakeholders trust scientists or don't trust? Anyway, she's exactly right. It is interchangeable on the outer loop depending on your project or your program's respective goals.
Last slide. So really, when we talk about impacts, and at your institution, they might be saying, oh, show me your citations, or what's your impact factor in that journal. But the work that we do, the impacts is seen with the people's lives being improved, right? So we're looking at why it's important to do transdisciplinary work. You can't solve a wicked problem. We'll have that in the next session. You can't solve a wicked problem with one discipline. We have to be able to collaborate and work together. You cannot get this information that's truly impactful in the community unless it is participatory. So a lot of this uses participatory action research to make sure we've got the inclusivity and the voice of the local respondents as they are using this technology or this innovation, and as they are being trained as leaders, opinion leaders in their own community. So it's more sustainable over time. And so it takes things like this to be able to make those big impact statements we were talking about earlier in some of those. Economic, environmental, and social impacts. And so we're excited to be here with you today, and we look forward to working with many of you that are also interested in the same topic. Thank you.
What questions do we have for Dr. Dooley and Dr. Strong? Doctors Strong.
You had mentioned that you are trying to utilize this type of framework in your teaching with grad students. Is this by chance more across the college grad students, or are you focusing just on?
At this point, yeah, you've got some other people using it in other classes, right? Across the college? Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, individually, that values piece is, to me, is the most important, because I view all students as very different. And I know the ones I work with directly are very different. And so there are different backgrounds and experiences and goals of their values. I adapt, try to adapt to those respective ones I work with directly. And so on the biological sciences side, I think it's really cool because they see value in what we do. I keep saying that word value. They see value in what we do. Like, oh, that makes sense.
They don't know. They don't have a clue what we do. And so we start telling them this, oh, this is what we need.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, you can do that? That's possible? Oh my gosh, you know. And so I think it's been a great, so far, door opener for us, particularly internally in our university, but also externally across the globe.
I used it as an undergrad in one of my undergrad classes that does span the whole college, and that's how I framed the course. So we are covering eval, all of the letters, utilizing, readings and what's going on in the world, to where when they walk out, they already, we're only in April, but they see things differently. They're like, oh wait, this is a problem. We can approach it this way, which has been really cool.
Yeah,
even with undergrads.
That's great, because I feel like I can see where this could easily be a college-wide course, especially, undergrads from a critical thinking standpoint, but from a graduate student, transdisciplinary bench science students who just, this is not what they're typically thinking about, but they must be thinking about that when it comes to proposal development.
Yeah. Great suggestion.
Yes, I think you had mentioned that one of the letters wasn't valid or reliable.
For the instrument that we've developed.
Yes.
The initial test of that instrument on that acronym is not reliable.
Which letter?
It's at leadership.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. I think I have a follow-up question, but I don't remember exactly what it was. But I know, similarly to Dr. Ron, I also think this was really interesting because I see a lot of things that I learned, but on my own in these elements, and so I think it would be really interesting to have a course like this, especially as you mentioned at the graduate school level, because I think a lot of what I learned was outside in intensive fellowship and graduate experiences, whereas like when I left undergrad, I don't necessarily feel like I was prepared to approach the real world, and so I think that this would be something that would be really beneficial to learn much earlier on.
And that's exactly how we've been building it into grants, is that if we're able to get teams of near peers, the idea is that the students will actually be going into communities, collecting data and analyzing data. We also work with the School of Public Health that already has pre-existing data on health disparities. And so giving students exposure to real data, to solve real problems, and then as they're becoming an evaluation scholar, is what we're calling them, they would go out with the toolkits, to be able to do that. And I know Katie was in here earlier, the first presentation, but I had the opportunity to work with her in East Timor when she was a master's student in Arkansas. And that's her area of expertise now. Like that experience made her know, I want to get my doctorate and I want to become an evaluation expert. And so being able to think about that next generation of scholars, you know, we should be teaching them to be evaluators.
Sorry, can I ask one more question? I don't remember what it was.
We have 1 minute left.
Okay, I was wondering how it was administered, like, is it usually done like an interview format or survey, or like how would one like go about using the eval?
The instrument that we've developed, is that what you're referring to? Or the approach?
Either or both.
Okay. I can answer that a little bit. So on the approach, some faculty have used it in their classes outside of our institution. A couple of them asked me to come in on Zoom and teach this session to their class, which I'm glad to do. If you'd like that, I'd be glad to do that, set that up with you. But on the instrument side, it's really a mixed method study. And so because of COVID, I wasn't able to be there, but I have some really close contacts with the ministry in that particular country. And that's the program that is of interest to them, they're passionate about. And so we married our approach with their programmatic priority, and they actually collected the data. Does that answer your
I
question?
use participatory action research. I do activity-based data collection in communities. So very different approach,
Yeah.
but the concepts work either way.
Concept's the same.
Okay, yeah, I think that just knowing that it can be administered in different places.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a mixed method.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for
Thank
these
you.
questions.
Thank you.